Hello, and today we're going to talk about classes. And classes are the way to create objects. So we are talking about object-oriented programming here. And up till now, we've used objects, we've played with objects, manipulated their properties, we've called them all these things. But we actually have not created our first object yet, which seems kind of odd. But I think that now that we know all the parts, especially here in C Sharp, on how to create good code, now it's ready to kind of create a class for ourselves. So this is going to be the first part in a small series where we're going to do that. We're going to just talk about what makes up a class. And basically, or what I'd like to get out of this here is the basic idea of it. So, what is an object? Well, we talked about a button, but obviously we can have multiple buttons before. So that means that something has to be able to create buttons and make unique buttons. And classes are the way to do that. The best analogy that I've heard for classes is probably the blueprint idea or the CAD drawing, which essentially just says that if I have a CAD drawing, I can make whatever I want. So in other words, if I have a blueprint for a house, I can make a house. If I have a CAD drawing of a car part, I can make that part, and I can make multiple pieces of them. So it gives me the ability to do that. So let's just take a car door or something like that. A car door has a CAD drawing somewhere of it. But that car door can be blue, it can be red, it can be green, it can have different handles on it, that sort of thing. However, if you only have the CAD drawing, you will never have a car door. So the classes are the blueprint / CAD model, and the actual physical object, the car door, the house, whatever you want to talk, is a product of those drawings, of those blueprints. And so the objects are essentially that, the actual pieces. And so we played around with more of the pieces of the classes. Now we're going to create our own class in order to make multiple objects. But before we do that, let's take a look at the pieces of a class. And I'm going to just throw this in here. This is a form. So we have our basic form here, and all that I did is create a list box called output list box, a button called toss button, and a button called end form, and a button called exit button. So feel free to pause and make these yourself. Now, if I look at that form 1 piece, we'll see something called partial class. And we've talked about this before. This class holds all these methods. It's a container of sorts. However, I don't want to get you all confused, so let's look at a pure class now instead of a public partial class. We're going to look at class coin. So we're going to call this class from our form 1. And we don't have to know a ton about it other than these parts. First, we have to give it a name up here. So we're going to call it coin. And we're using the classic coin toss example. So we'll flip this coin several times. But first we have to have a name, and then we have to declare it. So that's essentially what we're doing here. Notice what we have up top, though. We have a bunch of using statements just like you would have in the form 1. So anything that you're going to use inside of this class, you have to declare right away. Most of the time, in a lot of programming languages now, this is done for you. I didn't have to do much. And we'll show that. We're going to have a separate video on how to create one. But once you do that, then you have to have a namespace, because namespace holds the class. So in other words, I can put several classes in here. I'm only going to put one in here, but I like the idea of having the ability to put multiple classes in here. And then I call the class. and give it a name and declare it. And then we're going to use a specific string, which is called a field. The reason it's called a field is it's before any actual methods or functions are called. And if you notice, there's a private there, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but private means that nothing can access it outside of the class. So in Form 1, I cannot actually say what is side up or use side up anywhere in Form 1. It stays local and is restricted. Now there's ways to get it out, but we'll show you that in a little bit. The next line is something we've done before. We've done random numbers before. And the reason why I put it up here is because guess what that is? We're actually declaring an object. And in fact, when you say new random, that means you're instancing an object. And instancing is just a nice name of saying there is multiple versions of your object. So in other words, again, going back to the car door, I can have a red car door, I can have a blue car door, I can have a blue car door that's meant, that's its own being, even though it's the same as the other blue car door in terms of looks, but it's its own entity. So we can pop out as many objects as we want from a class once we get to it. And since we've done this random number before, we only need to pop it out once, but we have that ability to create multiple random numbers. And then after this, we have a very important part, which is called the constructor. And notice the name. It's going to be called public coin. That is, it has to be public because whenever you go into a class, you have to go into its constructor. And if you don't create a constructor, there will be essentially a constructor created for you. Now, it's dependent on the language, but most languages have a forced constructor on them. Now, why do you need a constructor? It's essentially a basic method that's going to set up and run the rest of the class. As you can see, it changes a variable here to heads, giving it a default. And then I put a message box show hi on there just to show that it's going to be accessed every time we create a new coin. So just like we had a new random up here, somebody out there can create a new coin inside of another language. This is also good for just setting up or initializing specific variables that you might use later on. You can pass these variables just like you can pass variables in a regular form. One thing you will note, and you should never do, is you cannot do a return. In this case, we'll put side up there. This is a no-no. Constructors never return anything. If you're ever going to return something from this class, do it in another function. We're not going to go into these yet, but as you can see, after that, we just have two methods, and it doesn't matter what these things say. All that you have to know is that we can create methods inside classes. We can have as many as we want. We can have as few as we want. Whatever you need to get the specific task done for that class, that's what you're going to use inside these, I guess, inside the scope of the actual class. It's probably the best way to put it. And that's basically it. So now we've created a class, and notice it's outside of Form 1. And the reason why we put it outside of Form 1 is because we want to know that you can instance multiple versions of this. So in other words, I can make up 15 coins in this case. And we're going to access it from Form 1 to either create 1 coin or 15 coins, whatever we need for that method, or excuse me, for that program. So the next step is to actually look how this works, and then we're going to have some fun and create one.